So we have some people here that you can see, Matthieu, and we have more attendees who are just in the attendee mode. So we can't see them, but they are here.
Okay. Yeah, I see a few of them as I move the cursor. Oh. Oh, Rob, how are you doing there? I thought I knew that name. So I click on the screen, I saw you.
So good
Don't
to
waste
see
your
you.
time. Nice to see you. What unexpected.
All over the world.
Yeah. So anyway, wonderful.
No longer an Indian Sangha, Matthieu. It's a world Sangha. Like His Holiness says, just one human family of 7 billion people who need to hear the Dharma.
Well. The crazy monk.
We love your Bhagavad.
Where are you, Rob?
I'm in State College, Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Oh, as your place. Okay, well, very good.
So nice to see you.
Yes. Okay. I don't know how the people found out. Okay,
My friend Rachel invited me.
Good. Well, I'm afraid it's the usual stuff. Okay. Have you been still involved with Mind and Life? Yeah.
Yes, I've been on the steering committee, and then
Right.
I help with Summer Institute.
Wonderful.
And also working with Mingyur Rinpoche. He's creating new curriculum. We'll see you there soon, I hope. I think you're teaching in that class.
Oh, that's right. Yes, another one.
You didn't say no, thank goodness.
No. I can't say no to Mingyur Rinpoche.
That's true.
Okay.
Suruchiji, did you want to introduce some of the Indian Sangha who have been involved with Dharma Rain, for example?
Yes. So while we have the time, Matthieu, I'd like to introduce you to Aspi and Supriya, who are here. That's Aspi and my Supriya. They are the founders of Dharma Rain, actually, and who moved on to doing other bigger, important things. So the rest of us.
Aspi, I see Aspi. Hello, Aspi.
Priya.
Hi. And then who else you said?
Priya is waving at you now.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, there's so many people I can get lost.
And then we have Ilango, who's also from Dharma Rain. Ilango, if you wave at Matthieu.
Okay.
Ilango.
Wonderful.
And my daughter Tanya, who's managing some part of the logistics. So that's Tanya.
Okay. Fabulous.
And you know Maria from Lisbon. She's
I can see her. Where is she? Oh, yes, Maria. Yes, here you are. Hello. Okay, great.
Dr. Anita from Goa. Do you know Dr. Anita, Venerable?
Oh, maybe. So sorry. You know, my brain getting old now. I don't rely on this stuff up there. I've been to Goa in 1968, so I don't know. I met you there on Kalangut Beach.
I don't think.
They've started a program on ethics, Venerable, at Goa University and in the schools of Goa. That was largely instigated by Dr. Anita.
Wonderful.
Her links with His Holiness's.
Wow, there's a very interesting new book by Daniel Batson. So it's called What's Wrong with Morality? And it's quite unsettling because he's the one who showed that altruism exists, and now he says morality, it's mostly not happening. But I had interesting discussion with him because he anyway, it's maybe not the time. We have only 2 seconds. But basically, my conclusion was without altruism, you cannot put ethics in action because just moral principle simply doesn't work. You need more a drive. Maybe we can speak about that a little bit.
Sure.
That's quite interesting.
Yeah, what we've done in Goa University is not just the ethics. We have for the first time the Dalai Lama chair of Nalanda studies.
Okay.
So we are going to be teaching some of the ancient Nalanda teachings, but in a more modern context as well. For they normally, the university has graduate students of all disciplines, and we also have been teaching them a bit of meditation and things like that. So it's
Okay.
the university, that's what we're doing, not just ethics.
Very good. So I didn't know what to talk about. Now you give me a good idea to talk about altruism and ethics. I'll try not to forget that. I'll make a note in my handkerchief.
Perhaps we can just wait 1 more minute, Mathila, if you'll indulge our habit to be late, even though we have no traffic to blame.
Okay.
Venerable Matthieu, have you ever thought of writing a pamphlet in the tradition of your French pamphleteers for people like us, well, like me, who prefer short versions of things? Your book,
Oh, the altruism book?
Well, your altruism book.
Yeah, well, everybody has been sending me that. I remember meeting an elderly gentleman from Belgium who says, I just finished your book after 1 year of starting. And can you write, please, a 100-page version?
Right, right.
So we are thinking to do a roadmap to practical altruism based on that and on things that happened since 2013 when I wrote the book. So like more on the most good you can do, the Peter Singer's movement and all these things. So yes, it's an interesting things to do. Let's see how much time we have to do that. But that's something to put all the practical aspects in one place. And if people are not convinced about the background, they can go back to the big book for the research and everything.
Right. How long did it take you to write that book? It's
5 years non-stop. I was writing in taxis, subway, waiting for the luggage in the airport, driving a car in Tibet, in helicopter, aeroplane, every possible, never wasting 5 minutes. And I got a post-altruism syndrome after that.
amazing.
I'll never do that again, promise. The 1,600 references is too much now. Now I'm just freewheeling.
Great.
Oops, telephone, I have to. Okay, wait a minute, I have to take this phone.
Yes, no problem.
Allô? Oui, bonjour madame. Merci infiniment. Oui? Oui? Ah là là, d'accord, oui, oui.
Nice to hear French again.
Si quoi? Pardon?
Ouais, d'accord. Suruchi, do you have the sheet? I mean, do you have the attachment that I sent you in case my Wi-Fi goes? Did you get that? You're muted.
Yes, I have what you sent me.
Touch wood, so far it's okay here. But, has been going.
It'll be fine for everyone. I have a feeling.
So did you have to go a little bit early to make some dinner for my mother?
Well, that's sad. This is being recorded, all of it?
Yes.
Suruchi?
Yes.
Okay. It's all being recorded, Anitaji.
Okay, then it's fine.
How's your mum?
She's okay, but you know,
Staying with you.
So Matthieu is back with us.
I'm fine. I'm so sorry. Yes.
So with your permission, I'd like to start, Matthieu, with a
Yes.
welcome note, and then I'll hand it over to you. Namaste, everyone. I'm Suruchi from Dharmari in Mumbai, which is a forum for study and practice of Indian contemplative traditions, primarily Buddhism. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome Venerable Matthieu Ricard, who has so graciously accepted our request to talk to us about a subject very close to his heart, altruism as the key for happiness. His absolute embodiment of the practices make him the ultimate authority to speak to us about these subjects, especially in these poignant times. To tell you a little about Matthieu, he's a French monk, author, translator, and photographer, and a meditator, and lives primarily in Nepal. At 20, Matthieu was already asking the existential questions. And at 25, after having completed his PhD in molecular biology, he had a calling to return to Darjeeling in India to be with the Buddhist master who he had met earlier, Kyabje Kanju Rinpoche, who taught him the value of practice. Upon Rinpoche's passing, Matthieu went to live and study with Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, one of the most revered masters of Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And we're talking of masters who in themselves are the Harvard and Oxford of Buddhist education. Even though he renounced the possibility of an illustrious academic career to answer a deeper calling, he has brought the rigor and discipline so acquired into every aspect of his life. Matthieu is an author of many best-selling books such as Happiness, Altruism, Why Meditate, and the much acclaimed dialogue with his philosopher father called Monk and the Philosopher. More recently, he authored A Plea for the Animals. Through his writings, he makes a compelling appeal to a more humane society. Compassion, he says, is a moral obligation, and an enlightened society is one that cares for all sentient beings. He has participated in dialogues with the pioneer neuroscientist Francisco Varela and the Dalai Lama, and also taken part in research experiments as a guinea pig at the Mind and Life Institute with Richie Davidson. His contribution in the field of neuroplasticity have helped modern science make huge leaps and in some way brought him full circle. As a teacher who really walks the talk, Matthieu oversees humanitarian projects for Karuna Shichen in Nepal and India, and their work has also impacted thousands of lives in Tibet. Today, Matthieu is addressing us from France, where he is looking after his 97-year-old mother, who is a well-known artist. I would also take this opportunity to welcome Kabirji, who is the program coordinator of the Tushita Mahayana Center in Delhi, who will moderate this session later. Thank you and welcome. Over to you, Matthieu.
Welcome. So thank you so much for your invitation. It's very nice to be talking all over the earth. And there's some in cities, some in the countryside, some in the mountains, some in the valleys. So it's quite an amazing example of interdependence. And interdependence is obviously at the heart of altruism and compassion. And why is that so? because, you know, we might be tempted by thinking, oh, it's much easier if I, you know, build up my happiness in my little corner. I'm perfectly happy if others become happy as well, but it's not my job. And so if we think like that, we ignore the fact that we are not separate entities, like snooker balls that will sometimes hit each other, and then, you know, that's it. It's sort of occasional interactions, and then we can just go on our own business. So that's kind of the view of extreme individualism, but it fails for several reasons. The first one is, according to our own experience, if we think me, me, me all day long, it's not a very comfortable state of mind. And we become extremely vulnerable, because basically the whole world becomes either a threat or an instrument to further our selfish needs. And we become a nuisance, and we also never really happy ourselves. Doesn't work. But the other reason why it doesn't work is precisely because we are so deeply interconnected, and that our own happiness goes through and with the happiness or the suffering of others. So we are deeply interconnected. So to understand this interdependence is actually the foundation of seeing why altruistic love and compassion do work, because they are attuned to reality. So now to go back to the experiential aspect, we know that the times in our life when we feel somehow the greatest fulfillment and the best to being attuned with what we feel is the depth of ourself, is when we do an act of generosity without strings attached. We help someone, we may save life, we may bring someone out of suffering, and we make someone happy, and such a deep satisfaction. And of course, others will perceive it in a constructive way, because precisely we try to bring some good to them, either increasing their well-being or removing some of their sufferings. And also, it's attuned to correct understanding of reality, because just in the same way that deep within, you know, if I go very much in the depth of the depth, no, I really don't want to suffer. Even I have been denied happiness for a long time. There's this little voice that always says, well, it would surely be better if I could find a way out. And nobody wakes up in the morning, as Dalai Lama often reminds us, thinking, may I suffer the whole day and if possible my whole life. So, you know, people define happiness in so many ways, but at least we all agree that if possible, we gotta get rid of suffering and its profound causes. So now, once we have identified that within ourselves, then it doesn't take rocket science to transport ourselves in other people's mind. And even like we sometimes are, they are deluded about what are the true cause of happiness, and we are often addicted to the cause of suffering, but nevertheless, just like us, they don't want to suffer. And this is the most common aspiration of all sentient beings, and not only humans. You know, when it comes to nominating or choosing a university professor, of course, intelligence, knowledge will be one of the main criteria. But when it comes to be stabbed in the stomach, whether you are a goat or a human being, on the moment, we equally don't want that to happen. So that basic drive or instinct or aspiration not to suffer is common to all sentient beings. So recognizing that is somehow recognizing our common humanity, our common sentience with other species. And that's really the foundation of altruism and compassion. Because you see, if I recognize that deep within I don't want to suffer, then I become concerned by that aspiration. It matters to me. Okay, I don't want to suffer, then what? How nice if I could achieve something in that direction. So then the next step is to achieve that, what will be desirable to accomplish and what should I avoid? If we keep on, say, keeping our hand in the fire and at the same time not wanting to be burnt, it's not going to work. As the Tibetan saying says, it's like waiting for the sun in a cave facing north. No, it never happened. So we need to distinguish between what should be accomplished and what should be avoided in terms of the consequences in happiness and suffering. So that's discernment, wisdom comes in the picture. So now, how then move next to compassion and altruism? Well, if I am concerned by my own happiness and concerned by doing the right thing and avoiding things that perpetuate suffering, and if I recognize that aspiration in others, then I should also be concerned by their fate. I mean, it would be so nice if they somehow could avoid suffering. And so then I will also be careful or concerned by the kind of thoughts, words, and action that I entertain that might affect others in constructive or destructive ways. So it is exactly the same process as I will do for myself, because we have the same aspiration and the mechanism of happiness and suffering is basically the same. So that shows how crucial understanding interdependence brings us to the very well-grounded reason to cultivate altruism and compassion. And you know, even a French writer, Romain Rolland, who was no Buddhist in any way, he wrote that if selfish happiness is the only goal of your life, then your life will soon be goalless. It's not going to work. It's a lose-lose situation. Everybody's losing. You make your life miserable, you make everyone's life miserable. Now, conversely, if you really, truly, genuinely care for the fate of others, it's a win-win situation because it's a very fulfilling. And then it also makes people happy, which is the idea of altruism. Now that's for the more like the experiential side. Now, could this altruism, have wider repercussion, or could it be seen in a much bigger context? Well, while clowning around in different places in this world and meeting all kinds of people in the field of science, psychology, evolution, economy, social workers, I mean, incredibly varied kinds of people, it became quite clear that specialists of the environment and so forth, that one of the main challenges we are facing today in the 21st century, which is the cause of many of our hardship, is the difficulty to reconcile 3 time scale. Now you have people in many places in the world who are below the level of poverty, and their main concern is to feed their family for the next day. So it's very hard for them to think about the environment and to think about global issue and so forth. They just have to eat and sometimes even be safe and stay alive. So very, very short term. But there are many other ways of short term being in our life. People who know those fast transactions on the stock market nowadays goes up and down without anyone knowing what within seconds. So that's also very, very short term, and nobody will invest in treasury bonds that will mature in 150 years. So some aspects of our even modern life and even of, people with resources is also very short term. It's the end of the month and the end of the year, balance sheet and so forth. And if you tell to those people, we have to do something different because what will happen in 100 years, I heard an American billionaire saying on Fox News, when he was told about the rise of the ocean level, he said, to change our behavior now for something which will happen in 100 years is absurd. So, after me, whatever happens, I don't care. So if you don't care, there's no environment problem because we won't be there. So he's joining, from that aspect, my favorite Marxist, which is Groucho Marx. I hope you know Groucho Marx. And he said, why should I care for future generation? What did they do for me? So, but the problem is that those people say that seriously, and there are many in this world who say that now. So if you want to sit at the table, and then there's, of course, that's the short term and the very long term. It's the fate of future generation, the fate of the biosphere, the fate of biodiversity, the fate of the climate, and so forth. In between, there is the midterm, which is how can you flourish in life? Because after all, it's a genuine aspiration that to find some kind of fulfillment in this life. And if a country or a person is the wealthiest and the most powerful, and if the whole place is unhappy, what's the point? So unless you have some deep satisfaction, then we are missing one of the main points. We look back 20 years and then we say we've sort of wasted 20 years of our life. So therefore, the midterm is the quality of life of a generation, a lifetime, a family, the career, and so forth. And so those agendas are quite different. And if you sit at the same table, around the table, some economists or investors, let's say, some people who really need to feed their kids, with some policymakers and social workers who try to improve things over 10, 20 years, and then scientists of the environment who think in 50 years or 100 years, there's like, there's a schizophrenic dialogue. They don't speak the same language. And so if we want to build together a better world and accept a few crazy minds, I think we all basically want a better world, even we have different definitions for what a better world would be, but only very few people would want everything to be an ocean of suffering. So we need a concept, a common thread that can reconcile those three time scales. And again, selfishness will not do the job, because then we will just maximize, as this is the definition of Homo economicus, by the way, to maximize your personal preference and interest, mostly in the short term. So that's not going to work for the midterm and the long term. Likewise, if you think not of the next generation, but of the next election, you are going to be very, very cautious about making decisions that are crucial for the future, yet that will not secure you a place in the next election. So again, you are bounded by that. And so you'll have a selfish economy, a short-term politics, and then the scientists of the environment will be totally ignored as troublemakers. Now, if you have one and a single concept that can seamlessly reunite those three time scales, is having more consideration for others. And that's kind of one of the definitions of altruism, which is both in psychology and in Buddhist term, is to wish other good. Now, Buddhism says people may find happiness and the causes of happiness, which is sort of implied, because if you wish someone's good, you are going also to entangle the causes and conditions that may bring about a better well-being. So now, if you have that more consideration for others, then you will strive to build up an economy that is more based on solidarity, not on just fast, short-term profit for a very few, but more like a more just sort of distribution according to the work of people and their capacity and so forth. So a positive economy, which is at the service of society and not society at the service of the economy. If you have more consideration for others, you will work slowly to include the notion of well-being, what the Bhutanese call gross national happiness, which is nothing to laugh about. This is a very serious concept that well-being is not just a byproduct of the GDP. GDP was not conceived for that, but to just measure financial movements and sort of prosperity, not the prosperity of a nation. Even in the words of the Kuznets, who did devise this idea of GDP, he said this is not measuring the well-being of a nation. So we'll have more consideration for others. We'll make sure that we provide. We cannot force people to be happy and altruistic, of course, that doesn't work. But we can provide condition of trust, of the social justice, of care, and that allow people to thrive. So that's the midterm. And then if we have more consideration for others, then we need to care for future generation and not just ignore them. So then we are bound to listen to the recommendations and the findings of scientists who know what can be done and say it can be done, but we have no time to waste. Nevertheless, it requires so much changes that nobody seems to be ready to adopt them so far. And we will also have a coherent ethics that will not consider the 8 other million species just as mere instruments that have been put in our way, on our part to use them as we please. But all those other species are subject of life. They want to, even though they cannot elaborate it in philosophical treatises, they certainly wish to preserve their physical and also their experiential integrity. They want freedom. They want to be able to play, to reproduce, to sort of go about their life and live as much as possible the full span of their life. Even they don't conceptualize it. It's clear when you catch a wild animal that it certainly wants something else than being caught. So all that enlarges the scopes of our ethics, make it more coherent. And so definitely this notion of more consideration for others is just not a noble sort of naive utopia. It's actually the most pragmatic concept to address the challenges of the next generation. Okay, now this being done, theoretical background, now you may say, well, but maybe we are also selfish, that's never going to work. So there's 2 things that we need to do. First, show that, okay, we certainly are selfish occasionally. Some are more than others, some less. And depends on temperament, depends on our upbringing, of culture, of so many things. But at least for those who are not convinced about that, we need to show that the possibility of genuine altruism does exist. And that's not obvious. Now, many classical economists have written that altruism has no place in the economic system. There's a guy called Francis Edgeworth who wrote that. And until late or mid 20th century, even among psychologists, the paradigm was that, of course, if we scratch behind the surface, you will always find a selfish motivation. Whatever we do, even it looks altruistic. So that's pretty dismal hypothesis. And if it's the case, then there's no point trying to cultivate altruism because we are not wired for it. Fortunately, it turned out to be all armchair science because there was never any kind of study, whether in psychology, experimental psychology in the lab or social psychology or anything, that has ever proven the theory of universal selfishness. They call it ethical selfishness. Well, and even philosophers have shown that this doesn't work. You cannot, it's nonsense. So I cannot detail all that. But the groundbreaking work was done by an American psychologist called Daniel Batson. Initially, he didn't really believe that true altruism exists, but he's a very rigorous and careful and thoughtful and well-meaning person. I happen to be happy to count it among my dear friends. And so he spent many 30 years devising some very, very well-designed experimental protocols so that you would give choice to people to behave in certain way. And even though you don't know what's in their mind, because what they'll tell you usually not very reliable, but you will put them in a situation that unmistakably they will behave in a certain way that will show if they did that in an altruistic way or not. Because they will have, we will give them plenty of excuse to elope the altruistic path without looking bad, etc., etc. Anyway, to cut 30 years of research short, I needed about 30 different experimental settings, because each time he will show something, another smart person will say, okay, now, but here is a selfish explanation for your result. So step by step, at the end of these 25 or 30 years, he came to a point where nobody had anything to say. And he said, well, so far, so good. It shows that, of course, not everyone all the time, but almost all of us, more or less often, I would say more often than not, hopefully, can be genuinely altruistic. And by that, it means that what you do, what you decide to do now, is the primary goal is, and the final goal is to bring something good to others or to relieve some suffering. That's why you do it. It's not because you expect something in return, either praise or long-term sort of, reward or anything like that. It could show that for many reasons. You don't care. It's not about your reputation. It's not even about, oh, that's me who did that. I feel so good myself. All that one by one, he managed to eliminate those hypotheses and show that, yes, well, something like, 30–40% of the subject will behave genuinely in altruistic way. I think for a Buddhist, it's like breaking open doors which are already open. It's pretty obvious, but you need the scientific proof to go a little further. Now, if that is the case, then you can think, okay, genuine altruism does exist, and then what? Look at the world. It's not in terribly good shape from many aspects, although we also underestimate another aspect, which is the banality of goodness. Because we are so flooded with bad news and the most terrible things that people do, from politicians to criminals, that somehow we develop the wicked world syndrome. Everybody is bad, human nature is bad, and the world is like terrible. And that's a very interesting reason why we pay so much attention. It's precisely because it's an anomaly. It's precisely because it's a deviance. If it was the normal way for a human being to be, then we'll not be surprised when someone does something terrible. So, no, but it's normal. Why should we make a news out of that? Well, you can kill anybody, and it's fine because that's what we do. So precisely because the banality of goodness is not as obvious, it doesn't jump in your face, but we can reasonably say that most of the time, most of 7 billion human beings behave decently to each other. Now, if 100 people volunteer to help elderly in a city, it's not going to make the evening news. If one of them rob a bank or attack an old lady and steal her purse, he might be in the evening news because it's a deviance. So we forget that, but it's there. So most of our interactions are more or less decent and positive. Now, but still, the world can be better, and we see many reasons why it should be also, if we want to especially address those challenges and the environmental crisis, which is potentially the biggest source of suffering in the century to come. So even if it exists, somehow we need to boost that. We need to boost cooperation. We need to boost the global sort of way of tackling the big issues and not being divided on these. We need to apply altruism more at the social level to reduce inequalities that have been steadily growing over 30 years in the developed countries and everywhere. So there's a lot of things that need to be improved. Some of them are improving. And again, we should not fall in the wicked world syndrome. You know, it's quite surprising that people think, well, we are living in such a violent world. Well, just to make a parenthesis, it's not true. Just in Europe, the rate of homicides in the 14th century was 100 per year per 100,000 inhabitants. Now, what do you think it is now? Not 10% less, not 20% less, 100 times less. Now it's 1. And over the world, I think it's 8 or 10 or something. And the average victim in conflicts has steadily diminished since the Second World War, even there are so many conflicts. It's because we see them all the time, first thing of the news. But globally, whether it's domestic violence, violence against children, war violence, anything, it is decreasing. This is the remarkable work that was synthesized by Steven Pinker in his book, The Better Angels of Ourselves. But it's very counterintuitive, and many people think it's not the case. They always bring you, oh, look at what happened there. Of course, always something happened somewhere. So there have been some progress, but we can do better. So now, how to proceed about that? So can we enhance altruism in ourselves? So that's a whole part of what I try to research with all my friends, scientists and others, is first of all at the individual level. And the answer is clearly yes. 2,000 years of contemplative practice, and as well as the work last 30 years in neuroscience, which shows that the brain can change even at adult age. That's called neuroplasticity, the faculty of the brain to change if we are exposed to new conditions, and if we voluntarily engage in a new form of training in something, whether it's juggling, learning to sing, or cultivating altruism through mind training and meditation. So clearly the brain changed. It changed very fast within a month if you do that 20 minutes a day, and even more and more and more as you go on over the years. So individual change is possible. It has also been shown that it can change even at the cell level. We inherit a genetic or genes from our parents, but those are more like a blueprint. It's like a house where you have 100 bulbs, and it's a whole different, the bulbs are there, but it's completely different if they're all off or if they're all on, or half are on and half off. So likewise, the expression of the gene can make a huge difference, and that's connected with our upbringing, what we learned, what we have experienced, we met in life, whether they are traumatic or loving in the young age. And in mind training, one of the study recently conducted showed that after 8 hours of intense meditation, you already change the expression of your gene. So yes, individual change is possible. Now, next question is, can that translate into societal change? And I remember being confronted with a French philosopher, who is a very, very good philosopher. And he says, Matthieu, your stuff about meditation and all that, it's very nice to feel good, but that's not going to change anything, because human nature is the same, and it's only institution that change. Aristotle, the great philosopher, was completely in favor of slavery. He thought that's great. 100 slaves making the life of 1,000 people better. Well, that's a good deal. So now today, nobody will, dare to think that slavery, after all, is quite good. We could bring it back. So the cultures have changed. We changed the institution. We changed the law. We changed international law, and so forth. So he says, well, your stuff is nice, but it's not going to change anything. So at the moment, because he's a very good speaker, I was a little bit left without argument. But when I thought about it, I said, well, what does that mean in terms of science? It means, which is quite true, that basically our genes, the human genome, hasn't changed much since Aristotle for sure, and even further up, 10,000 years. Only few genes changed about using lactose or something not very interesting. Certainly not about altruism, and it will take another 50,000 years to get a more altruistic genes, much too late. But one thing that he didn't figure out is the evolution of cultures, which are faster than genes, that can happen over 1 or 2 generations. And that change, if a young person is growing up in an environment where slavery is considered as barbarian, and all form of violence is considered as barbarian against human, against animal, that person will be different, even with the same gene. The brain will be different, expression of gene probably different, so it'll be a different person. And then those generation of people who change their attitude, like towards war, towards women, towards race, and so forth, they will naturally change their own institution, and then things will evolve through transmission, through imitation, through education, and yes, we can change. So that's all very good. So therefore, we now have a possible of individual change. There is an articulating point between societal change and individual change. They are sort of sharpening each other like the two blades of a knife. So we can translate that into a more enlightened education, a positive economy, something like we could call sustainable harmony instead of sustainable development, because always suspicious that you think you will use more of the natural resources. So sustainable harmony will be more like something where in the moment we bring more social justice, reduce inequalities, and in the long term we remain in a state of interaction with the wild part of the world where we are not forever depleting, point of no return in depleting the resources and the biodiversity, but somehow living in the world while keeping the world alive and not going to the 6th major extinction of species since life came on Earth. So, in short, altruism is not a luxury, it's not an utopia, it's the absolute necessity. We should dare to say that. We should dare to teach it in school. This is not like goofy ideas. We should dare to implement it in our life, to show it as a must in all aspects of our life, for our own life, for societal life, in a family life, and so forth. So this is why, in a way, I felt that, if you speak of happiness, I think I forgot a little bit to speak of happiness. I get a little bit bored with happiness these days. So very short, to link with altruism, which I think is much vaster subject. But I think happiness is just a consequences of it. Yes, so happiness, very, very briefly, has nothing to do with an endless succession of pleasant experiences. That's a recipe for exhaustion. Nothing wrong with pleasure, don't get me wrong. If you get a hot shower, I mean, not today, it's 39 Celsius here, but after walking in the snow, it's a delight. 24 hours in a hot shower is a nightmare. You get beautiful music, a raga or piece of Bach for 1 hour, great. 24 hours is torture. They use it in Guantanamo to torture people. So pleasures change, they become neutral, disgusting. You can be selfish while feeling pleasure. So it's a different thing. Nothing wrong, but it's different. Happiness is not a sensation, it's a way of being. It's a way of being that results from the cluster of fundamental human qualities like altruism, compassion, inner freedom, inner peace, resilience, everything that gives you the inner resources to deal with the ups and downs of life. And then because you feel more sort of confident that you can deal with the ups and downs of life in a constructive way, you feel less vulnerable. If you feel less vulnerable, you don't think me all day long. And then you can open your eyes and look outside to others. So being less if you don't have this exacerbated feeling of self-concern, then naturally you become concerned by others. It can even become your main preoccupation. What can I do for others? How can I serve better society? How can I transform myself to better be of service of others? That's the ideal in Buddhism of the Bodhisattva. It starts with loving kindness, wishing others happiness and the cause of happiness. If they suffer, loving kindness, and I didn't have time to speak about empathy, is alerted with empathy, which is very different. It's just the empathy either through affective resonance with others or to cognitive empathy, informs you about the state of others. Are they suffering? Are they joyful? And so forth. So empathy is the kind of information, the trigger, the red lights. Oh, this person is suffering. But instead of falling into empathic distress that leads to burnout, you bring the very warm and constructive feeling of compassion, which is nothing else than altruistic love confronted with suffering. Going to the prism or the crystal of empathy, it turns into compassion. For those who suffer, the aspiration becomes, may the suffering and the cause of suffering be removed. Now, there's not only suffering, you can also celebrate and rejoice in the quality of others instead of stupidly feeling jealous or envious of it. That's terrible. You know, you feel unhappy because others are happy. What a silly thing to do. So you celebrate and rejoice. And then also you should expand the circle. You cannot just treat well those who treat you well, or your kins, or small group of people. It's like the sun who will just shine on a few people in front. Result will be that even for those people, the sun rays will be less warm, less light, sort of shrunk and diminished. If the sun shines on everyone, then it shines fully with full light and full warmth. And yes, there are people in your life that are closer to you. So just like because of the circumstances of life, people are closer to the sun, they get a little bit more warmth, but it's not at the cost of discriminating against others. So ideally at the end, this should be extended to all sentient beings without exception. Now, I've met some philosophers who said, that's crazy. You cannot do that. You have to care first for those who are close to you. But they think that you are going to wake up in the morning thinking, I'm going to change the whole world, which is, of course, never work. But it's no difficulty at all to have an unconditional, universal love. Doesn't require that you absolutely change everything. You can't do that, but what it is in the depth of your heart. You don't exclude anyone from your heart. You wish happiness to every single human being. You wish them to be free from suffering to every single human being. Even the worst bloody dictator, you wish may the hatred, the indifference, the cruelty, what makes that person a bloody dictator, may that be dispelled. So that you can wish for sure. So that attitude, that aspiration, that is unconditional loving kindness and compassion that can be done. You simply don't need to exclude anyone. So anyway, this to, I didn't know what to say, but I could go on, I guess. I did 6 hours on that subject, and I didn't exhaust the subject. So interesting. The reason is that almost everything in our life, whether it's the environment, the economy, our human relationship, is somehow connected to that, dualism between altruism and selfishness. Violence is connected with that. Whether you are empathic or psychopath is connected with that. So it's such an all-encompassing thing that we really need to pay attention to altruism and how to cultivate it, how to bring it more in society, how to bring more cooperation, and how to build together a better world. So, enough talking. In France, there is a, how do you call that? When you share car with people. So, in France, it's called blabla car. So I'm the blabla monk. So sorry for my hot air contribution to global warming. Now, if you have any question, I will be happy to try to answer.
Thank you so much, Matthieu, for that very enlightening talk and delving into altruism and connecting it with happiness. We really appreciate that. I'll invite Kabirji now to bring up some questions that we had collected from our participants earlier. Kabirji.
So if he's not there, I have two more things to add. Sorry.
Okay.
Can I?
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Venerable.
May I?
Voila.
So two short things.
Sure.
One is that, some people say, oh, that's very nice. You're meditating on compassion in your hermitage, but what do you do? So since Ruchi, you inspire me to do so. Well, yes, so for many years, I was learning with my teachers, Kangyo Rinpoche and Khyentse Rinpoche and others. And it's the Dalai Lama, Dudjom Rinpoche, and many others, some of you might have heard of. But as somehow, I had any financial resources at all. I could see the issues around me, but I could not do much. Then suddenly in 1997, I did a book with my father, The Monk and the Philosopher, and suddenly some resources could have come my way, but I saw that I need them, so I started to use those things for humanitarian projects. Today, we founded an organization that is 20 years old. It's called Karuna, which you will know means compassion, and Sechen because there was the name of our monastery, and there was many Karuna already existing. And after 20 years of wonderful adventures, now we are helping about 300,000 people every year in the field of health, social services and education in India. Mostly the main projects are now in Jharkhand and Bihar, as well as in Nepal, in remote countrysides and many districts, and as much as we can in Eastern Tibet. So that gave me great satisfaction. So if you want to know more, we have a wonderful website, Karuna Sechen. I'm myself 74 years old, so I'm trying to pave the way to gracefully hand over, and I'm very happy to do so. We put in place a governance, and there's a wonderful team now everywhere, and we hope that in India, because it's much better if India helps India in a way that asking French people to help in Bihar. It's not too obvious for them. So anyway, and then the second thing I wanted just to say is that we should not, although of course we care for kings and but we should not forget other species. This is ridiculous to have this dichotomy. And the French poet Lamartine said, we don't have two hearts, one for humans, one for animals. We have a heart or we don't. And all those people who say, well, we have so much to do for humans, they don't know what they're talking about. Because even though you may not spend your whole time, do something for animal rights and so forth, but it takes absolutely a split second to stop harming. Now, I just give you a number to think about. There has been an interesting evaluation of the number of Homo sapiens who ever lived on Earth since Homo sapiens appeared. And surprisingly, it's not that much, even we are 7 billion now. It's about 110 billion. Of course, we don't know exactly, but roughly. Because 10,000 years ago, we were only about 5 million, something like that. So that's the number, 110 billion, of other species that we kill for our so-called needs every 2 months, all year round, year after year, as if nothing happened and doesn't matter. There's a big ethical issue there. It's bad for the environment, second cause of greenhouse gas effect emission. It's bad for the animals themselves, of course. It's like 6 million per hour. It's bad even for human health. WHO has looked at 400 studies on that. If you have a regular consumption of red meat, it's like not very good at all. It's bad for poverty because you could feed about 1 billion people with all the grain that is sent to developed countries to make meat. Anyway, to cut something short, even you don't need to be an animal welfare activist. At least you can stop harming, and it's good for everybody. Otherwise, everybody's losing. So I had to add that. Sorry for that. Not sorry, actually. Okay, sorry, I cut you. Now, please, your turn.
No, very good, very good. Thank you, Venerable. So I'll use my moderator's privilege to just kick things off. Then we have a lot of people, including activists, social workers, teachers, professors, doctors, and public who would like to ask things. Venerable, you quote Rabindranath Tagore in your book, in Altruism, very early on, well, page 92 of your 700-page opus. You quote Tagore as saying, "No one can resist the call of love," which is a very powerful statement, very wonderful statement. And all you've been saying also just now, one would think would strengthen that. All of the scientific evidence, the fact that reality of interdependence also encourages altruism and love. Yet we see, and you yourself also point to the fact that psychoanalytic theory has also made this case that actually we are basically selfish. And not only that, people who intellectually understand then everything you've been saying perhaps so far, yet find it so difficult to love, so difficult to open their hearts. So what are some beginning ways in which people, and people who have been very wounded perhaps also in this life, let's forget past lives for now, but just in this life, maybe carry a great burden from childhood or whatever, find it very difficult to open their hearts. We have many people come to our centers who have this kind of problem and who talk about it, and who even, some of them say, we feel angry when we hear about altruism because I need love. So how to work with this situation? How to help? How can they start?
Yes.
In their
So, you know,
feeling.
When I was doing all this research, at some point I thought, okay, now if I just show, I didn't invent anything doing that. It's just try to collect all the best research and knowledge available. So if I show that altruism exists and we can develop it and that's the solution, people will say, you're so naive. And there are genocides, there are psychopaths, there are people who suffer terribly, and so forth. So obviously there are contrary forces. And even though violence has been diminishing, but they're still there. And the domestic violence is still probably the main cause of violence, although it's not as obvious than war and massacres and so forth. So there are, of course, and we need to understand the reason for all those contrary forces. So genocides, for instance, might seem like a calamity that just pop up somewhere. In fact, the causes for these have been ignored for many years until it flared up. And many people have, being warning people when the early signs of genocide were coming, and they were mostly ignored. For many years, people, during the Second World War, it took some time for believing that there were concentration camps. Anyway, there are many reasons, and there are also people who, that's the different, that who actually say that there's no way out because we are born selfish. And so that's like you mentioned about psychoanalytic. I mean, I cannot go in great detail, but it's basically a theory. The idea that we have inside a strong sort of impulse to commit violence, and we spend all our time trying to repress that, and otherwise it will come out and we will wreak havoc around ourselves. I remember a French philosopher from that tendency who once told me on TV, you spend all your life repressing your inner violence. I say, oh, wow, how do you know that? First news to me, at least. Anyway, so that's, I mean, this will take too much time to debunk that, but it's definitely nothing to do with science. But there are other people who are the champions of selfishness. They say we must be selfish because that's the only way to survive, and the main goal of life is to be happy, and for that we need to care for our happiness, and that's it. So the idea that the main goal of life is to survive and be happy is great. Simply the conclusion that therefore we should be selfish is just contrary to what makes someone happy. So anyway, I think the last part of your question is very important. When you said, some people say, when you tell me about compassion and altruistic love, I have so much suffering that it's too much to hear about that. I mean, it just make I freak out, and that's very quite common. And I've been extensively having discussion with people who work on self-compassion, like Paul Gilbert and Christine Neff, and they say if those people who have suffered abuse, who contempt, who concluded somehow, I mean, maybe not intellectually, but in their experience, that happiness is not for them, and that they're just constantly, the object, the target of suffering, to tell them on top of that they have to care for others is much too much. It's overwhelming. So I must say that in the beginning, it was a bit difficult for me to understand this idea of self-compassion. I doubt that it would be some kind of recuperation by, Western sort of, self-help movement to bring compassion into a more sort of self-centered narcissistic way. I was completely wrong after discussing with those scientists and like Paul Gilbert. And it's very clear that if you have been wounded to this extent, you need to change that by having a more soothing relation with yourself. So you need to build up self-compassion, not to be too demanding that you do that things perfectly, to realize that you are not alone when you suffer. There's a whole trajectory of cultivating self-compassion. Even people who self-harm, self-mutilate, and they feel relief when they do that, those therapists don't condemn them. They say, okay, it's okay to do that. You feel some relief, but maybe there are better ways to feel relief. Anyway, it's a very gradual process to give confidence to people that somehow they might be able to find happiness. So once this is done and they feel more at ease with themselves, then it's time to move to look at others. So now in Buddhist term, I try to relate those two. And in fact, it's quite possible, because we always say that in order to feel compassion for others, you first need to identify within yourself that deep aspiration that if it was at all possible, I would rather not suffer. When that is accepted, then this is the first step to get out of the hole. Okay, it'll be better if I don't suffer. Let's take that as a principle. Then next, what to do? Then we start to get little hope and a way. So then again, it's what I was trying to mention in the beginning. You become concerned by somehow finding a little more happiness or less suffering. Then you are eager to do what might bring that about. And when you see that process somehow with the help of a therapist, or somehow with your life, or with the help of dear ones, benevolent people, you manage to progress, then it becomes more conceivable to say, well, it's the same with everyone. So now that I'm a little bit more solid, I can stand a little bit more on my foot. So maybe now also I can look around and see, could I do also something, at least start little, but something that I could help others to get out of suffering. So that is a long process, and it's some kind of healing needs to take place. But somehow it's not something different. It's always removing suffering. Simply you need to start with yourself, because otherwise you're too overwhelmed.
Right. So, the Venerable, when you quote Catherine Mansfield, her bliss, that she has this experience of joy, which you say is a product of being in the here and now, free and open. And you also say that happiness is a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. I think you're saying that this is an ideal to work towards, right? This is rather unusual, very, very unusual, perhaps. And what would you say in this context? And this comes back to a question somebody asked. Someone is asking, how can my daughter, who is age 22, who believes that life is meaningless, be helped to value and appreciate life? I mean,
yeah, well, that's the most.
Where does one start?
No, I know. I think one of the reasons I wrote the book on happiness is, one of the triggers was I was giving a talk to a small group in Hong Kong. And at the end, there's a young man at the back of the room. He got up and he said, please give me one reason why I should stay alive. He was maybe 25. What can you say? I felt totally speechless. Of course, I tried to say something humbly and, carefully, but this is the most tragic question you can hear. So, and you don't have, of course, ready-made answers for that. But, as Shantideva said, there's no big problem that cannot be broken down into small, easier one. So, in a way, you see, when people think that's something like a bliss of what Catherine Mansfield wrote, a lot of people say, well, happiness, that's not the magic moments, just take it. And then don't hope for something more lasting, more stable. And if it's okay if you're totally bored, if it's okay if you're depressed, and don't ask too much. Some French intellectuals, after I wrote the book, wrote an article called The Dirty Works of Happiness. We are suffering. Please don't tell us on top of that we could be and we should be happy. That's not fair. Well, of course, if you have no clue how to get out of this, one step by step by step, and it's very unfair to say, oh, you are in perpetual happiness and bliss and so forth. But at least most of those people, they say, well, let's appreciate those magic moments when they come. Great. Now, if you look at a magic moment, it's not just something totally mystery. It's not like suddenly you are sitting there and boom, it falls on you like from the sky, like a grace from God or something. There are reasons for that. Say, walking in the snow under the stars with someone you love very much and so forth. What happens then? First, you feel for a while, you forget about your difficulties, your inner conflicts, sort of vanish. You feel sense of spaciousness. You feel sense of something bigger than yourself, interdependence when you look at the stars, so big, so vast, sense of common humanity. All those things comes, even though you didn't elaborate or sort of articulate them. But if you look at those, all this can be cultivated. You can cultivate more resilience. You can cultivate the understanding of interdependence. You can cultivate the sense of belonging. You can cultivate constructive mental states. So once you start to identify what undermine my happiness, like hatred, jealousy, pride, lack of contentment, greed, craving. Okay, those are never did any good to someone. If you make a seminar and say, okay, come for a weekend seminar, we guarantee that you'll be 100% more jealous at the end. Who will come? Okay, we know that it's not good for us and for anyone. So somehow we know that those undermine happiness. Then we know that some others, loving kindness, sense of inner freedom, inner strength. Okay, we say we don't have them and I don't know how to do that, but we know those could be good. Well, then step by step, you could first recognize they're probably good, then see how you could enhance them. So it all takes time, it takes practice. So about meaning of life, at least if people recognize that, oops, what happened? I lost everyone.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, now I got it. Okay, something disappeared. So anyway, at least someone agree that it would be better if we didn't suffer. So now again, the process takes place. What did happen? Why did it start? How could I remedy to that? Not wholesale from one day to the next. But suffering and dissatisfaction is thought after thought, emotion after emotion. It builds up moods. Moods leads to traits. So it's a instant repeated process that build up. So likewise, you can undo that. Thought after thought, emotion after emotion, mood after mood, and gain some kind of freedom. So if you deal successfully with one mental state or one emotional instant of anger or so forth, well, at least you dealt successfully with that one. And by doing so, you also eroded a little bit the tendency to become easily angry or easily jealous. So not only you can have a succession of intelligence dealing with the emotions that then leads slowly to change of the mood and then further change of the traits. So it's easier said than done, but this is how things happen. So there's a way, and it's simply to engage into something. We need to see the benefit of it. Otherwise, it's like paying taxes. Why should I bother? Why should I make efforts? So the enthusiasm, the joy in the form of effort comes with taking the measure of the benefit. First, the possibility, it's possible. Second, there's methods to do that. And third, there are enough advantages so that it's worth doing that.
Thank you. Matthieu, several questions have centered around the difficulty of creating a sense of tenderness and sensitivity in a society that is so technologically driven, so urbanized. And there's a powerful moment also in your discussion with your father, where you say that Western efficiency is a major contribution to minor needs, and it really sets your father off. And I think you have a very dynamic interaction after that. There are so many constraints, aren't there? There are so many factors working against this natural human need to feel, to receive, and to give love. So
well, they are, but at the end, you do, and that's the most rewarding thing. So we should recognize, identify, acknowledge, and value those. So that's, this is a very complex issue. That's why, I always feel a bit, how do you say, annoyed when people keep on referring to my book, page so and so. But, among the contrary forces, clearly, the violence that is shown in the media has been shown to increase personal and societal violence. It's amazing. When you speak of action movie, what does that mean? Action movie means everybody is killing each other from beginning to the end of the movie. That's called action movie, basically. So all the media, even for young people, there's a tremendous percentage of violence, even in cartoons and all that. So all these things are go against. As you mentioned, social media can be an incredible force for good if you harness it for that. It can be also, there's the window of narcissism. I mean, if you have, 1,000 friends on Facebook, you don't have any friends, you just have show yourself and 1,000 people bother to look at that. So it doesn't work, and it's not communication. You don't see the face of others, the facial expression, the tone of their voice. So that's why also there's cyberbullying, because you will not do that to someone who's in front of you and you see suddenly is completely, you have destroyed that person and is in tears, but you can go on and on because it's all sort of virtual and it's not a conversation. I've heard of a testimony of a young 10 years old that was asking, but don't you prefer to have real conversation with people? He says, yes, I know, but I'm not ready for that. So that's very sad and dismal. So there are those contrary forces, and there's a way to somehow, wake up to that. And, it's a dynamic thing. Things come, and maybe we can moderate it. Well, it's a huge challenge. And again, I think the most encouraging is that despite the possibility of becoming narcissistic, psychopathic, completely selfish, and so forth, as a social animal, all the research done with very young children, 6 months to 4 years old, show that somehow, even everything is possible in the worst way, we have a stronger leaning and predisposition to to behave nicely, to appreciate those who behave nicely, and to cooperate. So there have been many wonderful works about that, about young children preferring people who behave nicely to each other, not to them. Stopping to play to help someone who drops something, cooperation, all kinds of. So yes, we can become psychopath. Yes, we can perpetrate mass murder, but at least as a social animal and as a human being, we have a stronger predisposition to be altruistic, kind, cooperative. Now, this needs to be nourished, needs to be fostered. We should avoid anything that would smother that and, eradicate that through education, culture, and so forth. But at least we start not with a wicked human nature, as Freud had said. He said, I didn't ask myself too much about the ultimate human nature, but from what I know, humans are rascals. But if you start like that, not only your own life, but in what you are going to do as a theory, then of course, you are bound to have an incredibly negative outlook on life. So that's not the case. Now, so science, experimental psychology has shown that. You can see also with the animals that this was through evolution, it's not just us. Animals can cooperate, they do so, sometimes unselfishly. There's been a lot of wonderful experiments done that as well. So the potential is there. Now it's up to us to nurture us, but I think it's not like an impossible task, and it's up to us. Okay, so time is running. I don't know what's your plan.
I hope you had your afternoon coffee or tea, Matthieu. I hope we can go on a while. I hope you're not tired.
Oh, no, it's up to you. I don't know.
No, we'd like to. I'll open it up because we have some, panelists who are my friends who will be very annoyed with me if we don't open it up, quite rightly so. But just a couple of questions that came to me from Suruchiji, which were posted to her, relating to meditation. So is meditation enough? Is that going to help us a great deal? And also if you could link it with what has really inspired you in your years with your amazing teachers, one of whose pictures.
Wow, that's a more interesting subject.
You, which can help us. And is meditation enough?
Meditation enough. This is, meditation doesn't exist. I mean, what I mean is, what are you talking about? You say to someone, I'm training. So the person is waiting. What? American football, badminton, chess? What are you training in? So meditation means in bhavana in Sanskrit means to cultivate. Gom in Tibetan means to become familiar with something. So what? You're becoming familiar with focused attention, with a kind of vast open presence, with compassion, familiar with the way your mind works, familiar with the nature of mind. What are you talking about? And each of those is a kind of training or familiarization. Each of them will give different outcome. Just like if you muscle your legs, you're not going to muscle your arms. Each of them has a different impact in the brain areas and circuitry networks. So then each of them also makes you, if you go in the right direction, a better human being. But also you could say that meditation can desensitize you and you kill people without thinking. That's also a form of mind training that sometimes apply when you train people to become mercenaries and so forth. In a way, it's a meditation according to the definition of the word. You just train people and become insensible to the suffering of others. So meditation is not just, again, a hobby. It's what you become to what you do with your mind. So this is very vast. And definitely we need it because we have a mind, all of us, we deal with it from morning till evening, can be our worst enemy or our best friends. So we better make it a little bit optimal. So in that sense, yes, we should not underestimate the power of transformation of the mind and the power of mind training, because we learn so many things to write and read and ride a bicycle. why, by which mystery, compassion, altruism, emotional balance should be right at the top at the beginning without training. That doesn't make sense. It's just at the baseline. So yes, we need that. And what was that? What was the other part of the question?
Anything inspirational from your time with the Lama?
Oh,
hundreds
well,
of
that's
what would you want to
more
say?
than 50, half a century in the Himalaya. That's the only reason why I'm all there. That inspire every moment of my life. What can I say? Very difficult. So only thing I can say, maybe as a teaser, is that I was lucky to grow in a very rich environment. My father was a philosopher. My mother is an artist. An uncle was an explorer. I was sort of a scientist. I met many musicians, classical musicians. So I met many people who had their own sort of capacities and genius. But as a teenager, I was quite puzzled that there was no correlation between being a great philosopher or a good gardener and being a good person. There was wonderful people and obnoxious people, happy people, unhappy people, equal distribution among philosophers, gardeners, sailors, and so forth. No correlation. So that was a bit puzzling if you look for a role model in life. Now, when I was 20 and I traveled for the first time to Darjeeling and met Kyabje Kangur Rinpoche, my first teacher, I didn't know anything about Buddhism, and I must say I didn't care too much because I didn't know. But here I found someone, and when I saw the extraordinary quality as a human being, I thought, wow, if I could become 100 of the human quality of that person, that would be worth spending my life. So then I spent 50 years, attending some of those teachers. And to cut a long story short, one of the main comfort I got from this inspiration on top of their teaching and so forth is not like it looks nice in the beginning, then you quickly see all the flaws behind were well hidden. It's not a facade. I spent so many years, 7 years with Kangur Rinpoche, 13 years almost day and night with Digo Khyentse Rinpoche because I was one of his attendants. I never saw or guessed any thought, words of action that could be slightly harmful to others. And that's, you could say, well, of course they are spiritual teachers, but think about that. It's quite remarkable in itself. And so the perfect coherence between the messengers become the message is very different than what we see with great genius in ordinary life. So that's what I could say one of the main lessons that retrospectively I can say. They show you what is the end of the path and they walk the talk, and even the path is long and I'm just at the beginning. I'm totally happy to go step by step in what I feel is the right direction. And their inspiration is with me at every single moment. They are those who gave meaning to my life. They inspire my life, give joy to my life, and make that when I die, even I'm quite stupid and lazy, I had such a fortunate life because of meeting them and being under their kindness for so many years.
Wonderful. Suruchiji, I would ask you now to help to get some of the panelists live, so we have some live spontaneous action from our very patient panelists, so the Venerable can see a different face asking him something.
But first, I'd like to make a rejoinder to what you said earlier, Matthieu, about constructive mental activity and a sense of belonging. I can tell you evidentially that some friends who have not been in the healthiest status of mind, having taken up relief work during these COVID times, have actually felt this great sense of belonging and have not needed to go to their therapist and are feeling like they are contributing both to their own lives through the work that they are doing for others. So it does work. Altruism in action or Bodhisattva work in action definitely has an impact on us. And I feel what you said earlier, that genetically we may take much longer to change, but culturally we can change much faster. So I think that is the level at which we need to be working on to bring about the change the society needs so desperately.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, well, it's certainly a trying time and testing time. And for those who are in nature, they felt a strong reconnection with nature. For those who are not too much in a tragic situation, they also felt some relation with loved ones and valued more. Some find, and that's also where you see how sometimes people, maybe underestimated the need to have tools to deal with your own mind. They felt quite disoriented to find themselves, just with themselves. And that's kind of surprising. They were very sort of innocent and not knowing what to do. And I remember when I was, until recently in my hermitage in Nepal, some French journalists managed to get hold of me to my phone. And then there was the main question that they feel lost when they are alone with themselves. And they say, how do you deal with that? I say, I love it. I'm just alone in my hermitage. So that's, I also thought, we are not always enough equipped to appreciate every moment of life through precisely cultivating this inner sort of, I don't know, space of richness or whatever you might call, of freedom, inner freedom. So yes, there are many lessons, and I'm not a specialist. I think we are going to have a Mind and Life virtual meeting, possibly with His Holiness. And one of the scientists of Mind and Life Europe has been extensively interviewing people to see their different reaction to confinement and so forth. So I think that's going to be very interesting. And there are quite a lot of trends and surprising things. I participated recently in a panel on biodiversity organized in Montreal virtually with the UN. And then the virtual audience, when they reported their reaction, they said those who were lucky enough to be in nature, they felt incredibly deeper and more increased connection with nature, which is very good. We need to have this sense of wonderment towards nature, and then wonderment leads to respect. Respect leads to concern. Concern leads to action, to care for, and so forth. So anyway, I think when we are in a situation that, the freedom is constrained, this is how we also appreciate more the inner sort of ways to bring a balanced sort of way of life. So yes, I know it's a challenge for many, and also many are more sort of immediate preoccupation with their material situation and their health situation and their dear one situation. But anyway, it's a very multi-level issue.
We have some questions from panelists, if you'll permit me to read them out, Venerable.
Of course. I used to be venerable.
Don't call me venerable. I'm nothing venerable at all, if you know the truth. As Matthieu will do. As my grandmother will say, if you call me for the soup, whatever name you give, it's fine.
All right. One of the panelists is asking, what does altruism look like in communities which have been oppressed historically? And I know this is someone who works in tribal communities which have been very marginalized. This is in Rajasthan in India. So probably his question is coming from the suffering and the status of the marginalized communities in India. So if you could say something about that.
Well, again, it's very pretentious and arrogant to give advice without really knowing what you're talking about, which is the case in my case. But we could say that in any challenging situation, this is more than ever the time to be together. I mean, those who have been oppressed. And imagine on top of that, they are each goes for themselves only. That's going to tremendously multiply their hardship instead of at least being together, cooperating, mutually helping each other, and at least finding also some sense, not only for improving their condition, but finding sense of comfort, and also to advocate their plight and make it known. If they're all divided and fighting among themselves, or on top of that, there's very little chance that they will have a voice. And so, I'm not a specialist of press community and how they can best rely, but I heard many studies about people reacting in terms of natural catastrophe. This is quite different, but it's also a time where a group of people, whether it's earthquake or some typhoon or something, is badly affected as a community, where the rest of the world may not be so. And contrary to the, usual thing, maybe someone looting a shop and all that, all the studies, because there's always something happening, and maybe sometimes it's just to get food for their kids that they go to the supermarket. But all the studies on the reaction to natural catastrophes and disasters have shown there's a tremendous outpour of cooperation and help. In earthquake, it's always the local population that first dig the rubbles and start much before the state gets organized and so forth. So that's quite comforting. Again, in my silly book, there's a chapter on that, taking the example of Katrina storm, where the government sent the federal troops because they thought everybody was looting and raping and so forth, and lost a lot of time, because actually they were incredibly cooperative, and what they did is material help and physical help, not the army. So that's a general happening. So that's also quite comforting. You should get all the more together when facing hardship. And usually it happens, but I'm not sure about the community you are talking about.
Thank you. Yes, we've seen that kind of cooperation during our floods and cyclones, and I'm seeing it firsthand during this pandemic. So it's true that people do come together rather than go apart. We have another question, Matthieu. What do you think about the direct nonviolent action and civil disobedience as expressions of compassion? For example, the actions of the group Extinction Rebellion. This is a question.
But again, yes, so as you know, Satyagraha in India, and Satyagraha means the strength of truth, I believe. So to nonviolence, and the Dalai Lama always says that the only way that Tibetan people faith would get better should be through nonviolence. And he speaks about nonviolence against human beings, nonviolence about animals, nonviolence against the environment. The reason is very simple, is that the only way that you mend differences and eventually have a constructive peace, not just a status quo or kind of, you make a peace treaty while still hating each other like anything, then it will not last. But if you somehow, come to understand a little bit each other's plight, come to, as the Lama says, a mutually agreeable solution, not easy, but it's the only way that you can build up long-term sort of reconciliation and so forth. So in a way, peace is not just the absence of war, it's like an active, constructive thing to be built. What was exactly, I think I lost the thread of your question.
It asks compassion in a scenario.
Oh yeah. So now, if you decide, like an extinction movement, to do something like that, you should abide by nonviolence very strictly, because especially your opponents will be watching like anything, any sign that you actually violent, because they try to present you like that. After the Altruism book, I wrote a book called A Plea for the Animals. And I came upon a study on the way that vegetarians and vegans are seen in Europe, in the public opinion. They are sort of seen as troublemaker, potentially violent people, people who really disturb society. Now, if you come at a table of people and you say you are vegan, it's almost like you are insulting everyone, because somehow they feel somehow a little bit guilty deep within, but you're breaking the statu quo. And so if you want to dispel that that biased view, which is nothing, I mean, if someone is advocating for less violence against sentient beings, it's precisely you said, don't just kill them. No, my animals are my friend, and that won't eat my friend, says George Bernard Shaw. So you are clearly advocating for much less violence. So, but there are in Europe some groups of extremist sort of vegan who, I mean, they don't go and kill people and do terrible things, put bombs, but they say spray red pants look like blood on butcher's window in the street. I mean, it's a bit stupid. Nobody is harmed, but you cannot believe they put that in the front page of the newspaper. The vegan got violent, and there is a special cell of the French police to deal with those dangerous guys who spread some red pants. Even though, you know, there are millions and millions of, 50 millions of animals killed every day, and nobody cares. So I think you should be absolutely unconditionally non-violent if you want that to succeed. And no, like Gandhi was, you know, when they did the Salt March, even they were beaten by lathis and sticks, they will not retaliate. It's the only way you can succeed in the end. So that's my very humble advice. Don't go and ransack the research lab or do animal experimentation. Don't break the windows of butcher, but inspire people positively by showing the beauty of nature, the intelligence of animals. You know, when you saw this incredible, you know, research showing how incredibly intelligent even pigeon can be, you know, or parrots can be. The pigeon can distinguish, if you train them, between a Picasso and a Monet painting. I mean, they're incredibly smart. They have consciousness. So if you inspire in this way, then people will change their attitude. So non-violence is the way, but it should be no concession.
Thank you, Venerable. It kind of leads me to the understanding that ultimately it's all about motivation. You've brought it in your
No
book,
question.
Father, and also His Holiness brought it up in his address to the Metropolitan Police, where he you know, okays them exhorting to violence when they need to, or some sort of force, but to always keep their motivation in check. So I think sometimes our actions can become self-defeating if our motivation is not in the right place, and we end up doing more harm to our cause.
Yes. So that's a very important issue. You know, altruism is not just the way your actions look like, because you could be doing something that looks altruistic with a very, very selfish, interested motive. In the end, take care of an elderly lady and just want to get her money or something. So yes, the motivation should be translated in action as much as possible, obviously, but not just the action. So altruism starts and is defined by your state of mind. Then action follows as much as possible according to circumstances. If you cannot put it in action, it's still altruistic because your attention was genuine. If you do something nice but with a selfish motive, it's not altruism. So everything lies at the, and in Buddhism we say everything lies at the tip of your motivation. The motivation, you say if your motivation is right, your path will be right and the fruit will be right. So that's, you know, when you get up, whether you go 4 steps south, north, south, east, west, that's the whole journey will become south, north, east, west. So that's the motivation. How do you start for what? With which goal in mind? Is it small? So the question is it I'm doing that for only for myself, or do I consider others? Then if I consider others, do I consider a very small number or the larger number? And then do I do that for the short term or for the long term? And ideally, the motivation should be for the benefit of the greater number for the long term. So that's a kind of, it's a no-brainer. So that's why motivation is so important. It determines the direction of the journey, determines the quality of the journey. So we said the motivation is like a colored cloth. And if you put a crystal on the color cloth, it takes the color, the crystal shines, whether it's blue, green, yellow, depends on the color. So the whole crystal takes the color of the cloth. So the whole actions, words, toward what you do, behavior, projects, depends on your motivation. So it's absolutely crucial. So that's why we spend so much time in Buddhism to generate the proper altruistic motivation. Ultimate one is may I attain ultimate enlightenment so as to gain the capacity to free all beings from suffering. So that's the ultimately vast, infinite motivation of the Bodhisattva. And that's the best of all. Wonderful. So I'm afraid I might have to take leave of this wonderful audience and friends. I hope you don't mind too much. Yeah, anything? Last one. Okay, very good. I see you are looking to your paper. So one last concluding one.
Well,
I don't hear you anymore.
Suruchiji, you are muted. Do you have something?
I'll bring up Raghav, who has been waiting to ask a question with your permission. Raghav.
Raghav in Delhi. Wonderful, wonderful.
I will unmute you and you can just ask your question, Raghav.
Thank you. Venerable Kabir and Matthieu, Venerable Matthieu, thank you. And please forgive me if this question has already been answered. You know, it's my lack of attention, which has been a major cause in my, not growing mentally. So if this question's already been answered, please forgive me. But my question was, you see, now, how does one influence influencers or people who are extremely wealthy to say participate in altruism? Now, I can't just inject motivation in them. I may have the motivation to participate in being an altruistic human being and giving and all of that, but I can't just go up to people and start reciting stanza 129 from Bodhisattva's Way of Life and tell them that whatever joy there is in this world comes from desiring others to be happy. But so my question is quite simple. How does one skillfully, if you have access or if you do meet people who have the ability to influence, the ability to change, like, all these really huge billionaires. I mean, a lot of these billionaires who have so much money, really, they do no charity. Even like, they say that this Jeff Bezos or this guy gave like 100 million to charity in April, but the guy earns $250 million a day. So he's giving really nothing. And all the money that is coming to him is coming from exploitation. So it's actually a simple question. How does one influence people who have the ability to change a lot?
Wow, what a question. I wish I knew.
Just
I
even
would
in a
have done
skillful
so.
way. Even in a
No, I
skillful way.
think, from my little experience with 20 years of humanitarian projects, it's very, very unpredictable. I will tell you just an example because it fits with your question. In 2005, I was asked to, someone invited me to Davos World Economic Forum. I said, why should I go there? I'm not coming. I was just planning to be in my hermitage. I said, thank you so much. It's not not my cup of tea. So the same lady, she didn't get discouraged. And next year she called me again. I said, look, you have humanitarian project, that's sort of the best place. Besides sharing your ID. So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I went and I went again and I went 10 times and now I stopped. But so the first year, there are probably, I don't know, several hundred billionaires for sure. There was traffic jams of private jets in Milan and Zurich. The first year I did meet 2 or 3 people who became very good friends. They are unfortunately billionaires, but anyway. But they are wonderful people who became friends and helped for our projects. And also I met wonderful intellectual scientists, and that's why I continue to go for a while. But remarkably few. And then while doing conferences, I was clowning around all over the world for many years. I think my friend Askaruna when I was planning to stop, which I more or less did, I calculated that at 124 conferences in 4 years, that brought quite some help for the maintenance project. So what's going to happen if you stop? I said, well, you have to find a way. But what I noticed is if you go somewhere thinking, okay, I'm going to find someone who will support the project, you never know. So you have to go. And I remember in Taiwan, completely unexpectedly, someone got up at the end and raised his finger. I said, I'm going to help your project. Wow. And then he has been doing so. I met him twice in my life. He's been doing so every year, quite faithfully, and not quite as significant. So it's totally unpredictable. So you have to go, and then sometimes the chemistry works. But what I can say is that there's no way you can convince by arguments or force. I say, look at all your money. You know, when Donald Trump said he will stop the funding of WHO and 400 million a year, and I knew that he had some problem with the one person you quoted, Jeff Bezos. I thought, well, you know, the next morning, a smart thing would have been Jeff Bezos waiting from the COVID, he got 20 more billions or something. The next morning, he could have said, okay, I'm paying those 400 millions right away. That would have been so neat. Why he didn't do that? I'm so sorry. But there's just no way you can do something. You know, I could tell you thousands of stories of people who could have done so much and did just basically nothing. And other people who, there was a music teacher all his life he taught in a small music academy in Switzerland. And last year he became one of our, you know, significant contributor. He said, you know, I've accumulated some funds over my life. I found what you do is wonderful for the people. It's so touching, you know, someone who don't have so much means and who does something. So it's vastly unpredictable. And so you just have to, I think the people who do end helping, they have to feel for it. You cannot force by reason or by saying, you know, you should do that. And they are asked by everybody the moment you have some resources to do some help. And all those, I must say, became friends. We feel like we are a family. We invite them to visit our projects in India and elsewhere. They come back completely enthused with what we do. They say, wow, you know, we have a program called Small Money, Big Change. It's wonderful. They get so happy to see that, how much we can do with, you know, quite not so much. So I think you have to instill some joy and enthusiasm. You know, when I did the book with my father, I was living, you know, basically with the equivalent of $50 a month in Darjeeling. I mean, not that I was depriving myself. I was living in a small hermitage, 9 square meters without electricity, water, and so forth, completely happy. So when I saw the contract which my father was doing with the publisher, I said, look, you know, Ferrari cannot run in those mountain roads. There's no swimming pool on slopes. So what I'm going to do, I don't need this money at all. And then I will get the French tax people on top of me, which I've been running away for so many years. So I don't want this money at all. I don't need it. It's only source of trouble. So then I found a way to give to a foundation first. Then we created this Karuna section. And since then, I gave 100% of all the conferences, all the books, everything wholesale to those projects and to sort of look after the spiritual heritage of Tibet also, I mean, of the monasteries. So I feel so happy about that. And so I think it needs to have a great joy of doing something. You cannot force people. And so it's, I think, I don't know, a mixture of karma and opportunity, inspiration. And with people come out of the blue and do something, and the most likely candidate, I could tell you all kinds of funny stories. You know, one of those billionaires, one invites me to come to speak in London to an evening at his home. And there were some people on the guests, they flew on private jets from New York first for that evening. So I thought he's going to do something. You can't believe the outcome. I'm not going to tell you, I feel embarrassed. Hardly anything for the project. So, and some people, they don't have much and they do a lot. So it's unpredictable. So I don't know, I have no magical recipe. but there are people wonderfully generous, whether they are wealthy or not. That's their life. And equally, we are welcome. They welcome with the Karuna family. And we really don't make distinction because everyone does what they can, those who help, with their own capacities. And that's all commendable, remarkable, and I feel full of gratitude for all those who are supporting us. Because again, they are the one who makes those things possible. They are the people dedicated in the field to do the project. They are me running around like a clown. They are all the people in the different branches in France and Hong Kong and elsewhere who do try to have a website and all that. They are the benefactors. So all that is the same family. We work for good. So this is great. And anyone who wants to join, welcome. So you are welcome as well. Hey. Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you, Suruchi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raghav. And hope to see you at some point.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you'd like to show your appreciation and gratitude for Matthieu, do please go to the Karuna Shechen website and see how you can support the work that he has been doing. Thank you for everything that you do, Matthieu. And
welcome.
And for working on our own minds through your books, which have such a profound effect on us. So we pray for your long life and good health.
Well,
and
I will live very long as I'm alive. Then we will see.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I know Rob, so thank you, Rob, and Suruchi, and bye-bye, and take care. Take care of yourself and take care of others.
Thank you. You too.
Once I went in India at Shivananda Ashram in Rishikesh. I didn't last very long. They kicked me out after 24 hours. But there was a beautiful bust of Shivananda. And it says, be good, do good. I never found a better motto than that. Very simple. Okay. Be good, do good, and be in peace. Bye-bye.
Promise to try. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Thanks very much, Suruchi. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. See you all. Have a good dinner.
Thank you, everyone.
Great question, Raghav Bhai. I thought you were falling asleep, but you were asking that amazing question. Thank you. And now you are muted. Okay, I think we log off now, do we?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Leave.
Thank you, Michael.